Hello, and welcome to the Career Compass program, which includes online learning sessions, podcasts, videos, webinars, white papers, and whiteboard videos, all specifically designed for NAVFAC. Please check the Career Compass Resource Center, or CCRC, often for updates and new content to support your learning. This content will assist with learning and development within the 20 non-technical competencies outlined in the Workforce Development Strategy. Today's topic is choose the right negotiation style for the situation in support of the influencing and negotiating competency. Throughout this video, you will see a paper/pencil icon on some slides, indicating a workbook activity. When you see this icon on the top left corner, it means I'll be asking you to write something in your workbook or refer to your workbook. If possible, download the workbook from the Career Compass Resource Center, or CCRC, before continuing with this course. However, if you are not able to, that's okay. Just use any piece of paper and write your thoughts down on that. You can always transfer it to the workbook later. After completing this course, you'll be able to assess the circumstances of a negotiation, decide on the most appropriate negotiating style for the situation, practice choosing a negotiating strategy, and defend why a particular style or strategy should work best. People share a common misconception that the goal of negotiation is for both sides to reach a compromise. While negotiations often will result in compromises, that isn't always the goal. In many cases, as we'll discuss, your goal will be a win-win agreement. This means that due to the quality of the negotiation, both sides feel like they gained something and the relationships of the participants are strengthened. Most people do not look forward to negotiations, but you do it all the time, with friends, loved ones, and coworkers, to name just 3 examples. You can ease the stress of negotiation and gain advantage through preparation, and by remembering that the goal of negotiation isn't a confrontational argument that you either win or lose, but one that should result in gains by both sides. Let's start by looking at the pre-negotiation setup. The first step is to assess the situation, including the context for the negotiation, the circumstances, the context, goals, and relationships. But first, a question for you. Why do you think exploring and understanding the context and circumstances surrounding an upcoming negotiation is a very valuable first step? Why do circumstance and context matter? Please pause the video and record your thoughts in your workbook. Resume the video when you're ready. Negotiating is one of the most basic yet complex social interactions that people undertake. Good negotiators improve with practice, but no amount of practice helps you if you don't know your subject, the people involved, the potential pitfalls, and the facts. You want to know as much as you can about the other party or parties to the negotiation so that you can plan your strategy, including your negotiating style. You can learn about the other party or parties through preparation. Doing so, you can develop a strategy for the negotiation. This also builds confidence and credibility. Finally, consider that when you negotiate, you are often not representing only yourself or your sole interests. You represent everyone with a stake in the outcome. In addition to learning about the other party or parties to the negotiation, be clear on whom you represent. Identify their specific needs and develop a strategy that will meet those needs. Also, learn as much about the context of the negotiation as you can. Where relevant, even make sure you are aware of the prevailing political and economic environment before you begin negotiations. For example, if you were buying a house in a new city, you would probably be sure to investigate the current market, such as whether you are in a buyer's or seller's market. You would check interest rates and trends. You might learn whether land value in the neighborhood is rising or falling. Gather as much crucial information as possible before you commit to a specific strategy. Your strategy has a much better chance of success if you understand the context of the talks. Seek clarity. For example, clarify basic facts like who will join the discussions on the other party's side and who is their lead negotiator. Is there an agenda? Find out more consequential factors such as, are you negotiating with the final decision makers? Is the negotiation meant to finalize an agreement, or will that come later? Is there just one other party to the negotiation, or are there multiple parties? If you have more than two parties, including yourself, assess the perspective of all the parties that can influence or are influenced by the potential agreement or the failure to reach agreement. People who enter negotiations with high expectations and clear goals tend to emerge with better results. So write down your specific objectives and, if you need it, bring a cheat sheet as a reminder. To succeed in your negotiations, be clear about your goals and move decisively toward them. Act in ways that preserve your important ongoing relationships. Managing these somewhat conflicting desires requires you to be flexible. Your counterparts have needs and goals too. While it is much more difficult to find out what those are, it is as important to understand their goals as it is to understand your own. If you are dealing with government or a public figure or entity, you can get information through documents published on their website, analysts' views, the press, and elsewhere. You may have to dig deeper when negotiating with private citizens or entities. Finally, think about the relationship you have or want to build. If you're negotiating with a work colleague, another team within NAVFAC, elsewhere within the government, or with an important partner, preserving the relationship may be more important than achieving any other goal in the negotiation. Preserving relationships usually matters. Remember that in general, people expect to be treated the way they treat others. This creates trust and leads to win-win negotiations. Now I'd like you to think of your most recent negotiation, at work or personal, good or bad. Did you take any time to prepare for your last important negotiation? If so, what impact did that have on the negotiation and/or on your approach to the negotiation, including the strategy and style you used? What, if anything, will you do differently in advance of your next negotiation? Please pause the video and record your thoughts in your workbook. Resume the video when you're ready. Beyond considering the circumstances and context of an upcoming negotiation, it pays to prepare in other ways too. Preparations should include getting a firm handle on the facts, choosing an appropriate negotiation style, and planning your opening, your bargaining position, and your closing. You may also want to think about how you might enforce implementation of any agreement that you reach. The first stage in developing your strategy and negotiation style is reviewing the context and the information you've collected to formulate your plan. Consider the following: the desire or need to maintain future relationships, whether there is a power imbalance, for example, whether the other party holds all or most of the cards, or vice versa, and whether common concerns and interests exist between the participants. You or your organization's past dealings with your counterpart and the style, approach, and attitudes they adopted in previous negotiations should also be considered. If you have no past dealings, see what you can learn just by viewing their website if they have one. It might offer helpful clues, such as to their openness or transparency. Try to understand their timeframes. This can also be a point of leverage and strategy. If you know they desperately want a quick agreement, you can use it, ethically, to your advantage in forming your strategy and planning your style. Think through the available strategies that you can employ. The four main negotiation strategies are: to evade or avoid a negotiation, to take a conciliatory approach, to compete or challenge, or to cooperate toward a collaborative solution. Challenging and cooperating are proactive, while evading and making concessions are reactive. Challenging and evading call for low cooperation, while conciliations and collaborating involve high cooperation. In any negotiation, it is always better to be proactive instead of reactive, and to cooperate rather than obstruct. Evasion is the attitude, "I would like to put it off for later, but I can't." This is a risky negotiating strategy, as we'll discuss in a moment. Get a feel for the negotiating style of your adversary's representatives. How they handle or refuse to handle confrontation during bargaining indicates their style. If you can understand their style, you can get a picture of how the negotiations might unfold. Healthy confrontation is required for negotiations to progress. Too much confrontation hurts negotiations, but without some confrontation, issues don't get to the table. Non-confrontational adversaries will be either passive or authoritarian. Authoritarians use any means necessary to circumvent real negotiations. Dishonesty, aggression, or creating an environment of fear. Passive ones will listen patiently and then restate their original demands. Neither gets you anywhere unless you're willing to capitulate. If you have never negotiated with your counterparts before, try to find out how they make their agreements with their customers, vendors, or suppliers before you plan your strategy and style. The way they deal with others is probably the way they will treat you. Again, you can learn a lot about an organization by checking its website. Do they appear open and transparent? Does the site provide useful information about the organization? If so, expect it to be collaborative. If, on the other hand, the organization is highly secretive and not willing to share much about itself, expect it to adopt a competitive posture. If you are not sure how the other party will negotiate, begin with a cooperative attitude. If they are reluctant to work with you, become gradually more competitive. Evasion and avoidance are often used to sidestep real negotiations. However, there are times when evasion or avoidance makes sense, such as when you can see no benefit to negotiating. This may be the case when the cost of negotiating is too high, which may happen when the other party is actively upset or irrational, or when resolving a problem would cost more than it's worth or damage a valuable relationship. Consider avoidance as a strategy to either stall or terminate the discussion. You may also want to use it when negotiating on a minor issue or when your best option requires no negotiation. Be aware, though, that minor issues can turn into major ones over time. Avoidance and evasion might be a good temporary approach, but may be a bad way of dealing with the issue tomorrow. Note that when the other side avoids negotiating, that may indicate that they believe you are too stubborn in your position, or the discussion is going nowhere, or that they have nothing to gain. If you want it to move forward, consider adopting a conciliatory style until you're back on track, and then a cooperative style if they meet you halfway. Conciliating and accommodating is based on giving the other side whatever it wants. You might think you can develop future relationships this way, but what you are more likely to accomplish is an expectation that you will capitulate in future negotiations too. As in the previous example, accommodation is sometimes necessary in a negotiation, but use it with care. For example, you might make 1 or 2 initial concessions to buy time if you need it, or to build trust and goodwill. Consider accommodation if you need time to strengthen your position or to nudge the negotiation toward greater collaboration. Remember that prior preparation allows you to make intelligent concessions in context, so that giving in doesn't become an expectation. For example, you might say, "We understand the position you are in with your constituents around X. We want to break that barrier for you by entertaining what you propose in this case, even though it is not our ideal outcome." Conciliation is also appropriate when the relationship matters more than the outcome. But make accommodations infrequently, since they can establish a pattern in which you always give in. Challenge and competition are the zero-sum game strategies that boil down to, I win, you lose. When you think of negotiation, you probably think of haggling and bargaining to get what you want. Most people prefer a more collaborative approach, but if the other party is aggressive or if the situation otherwise calls for it, you must be able to negotiate competitively. If you don't stand up to the aggressor, you will likely be put on the defensive, which makes negotiating more difficult. If your combative counterpart recognizes that you will compete too, they will often switch to a more collaborative style. You should avoid instigating a competitive or combative posture in most cases, and certainly when unethical, such as a tow truck driver who demands an exorbitant price from a driver stranded in the desert. Use a competitive strategy when the other side refuses to cooperate or when collaboration is not worth the time or trouble. Alternatively, if you want your goal intensely and don't have an ongoing relationship with the other party, consider taking a competitive but ethical approach. In a negotiation, cooperation is, in general, the style you should begin with and attempt to move your counterpart toward where possible. Cooperation is especially desirable when the potential conflict is over a small reward, or when the parties are in the same organization. When you negotiate cooperatively, you work with the other party to resolve the conflict. Try to advance your interests by helping the other party achieve theirs. This gives value to your shared relationship. Even though most people prefer the less stressful approach of cooperation and mutual problem-solving, it tends to occur less often than competition in negotiations. Nevertheless, take an optimistic approach to cooperation, but also a practical one. Try to cooperate even as the other party is challenging. Do this especially if preserving the relationship is key, but also to demonstrate your reasonableness and to give your counterparts opportunity to switch styles. Encourage cooperation by seeking common ground, especially where you have different interests that allow trade-offs. Build a win-win agreement by weighing the parties' varied perspectives. Often, what's most important to them is less important to you and vice versa, and by exploring these wants and needs, you can sometimes spot the win-win. Communicate until you understand each other's needs and objectives and agree to work together to build deals that serve both parties. Start by investing the time to properly identify and describe the problem. This is harder than it sounds. Use objective language and discuss the conflict in terms of a common goal. Build a shared understanding of each party's underlying needs and interests. Create alternative solutions. Reshape negative suggestions into positive ones, evaluate proposals, and select a solution. Pay attention to emotions and relationships, and make sure things are fair and perceived to be fair. The most effective negotiators employ a cooperative style, but not every time. They switch when the situation demands it. After all, cooperation depends on trust, openness, and collaboration. To cooperate successfully, both sides must participate. Divide negotiations into stages and focus on what you will do at each stage: preparation, opening, bargaining, closing, and implementation. In preparation, gather and exchange information. This allows the parties to establish a basis for discussion about the issues, interests, and expectations at hand, and it builds collaboration and trust even before the negotiation starts, paving the way for cooperation. Also, prepare by determining what deal you would accept and where you'll start, your opening offer. Expect some back and forth between the opening and the final deal. Plan your limits for what you'll accept, your walkaway, and what you'll do if you can't agree, your alternative. The first three concepts establish your bargaining range, the area within which you can reach an agreement. Once the negotiation starts, a commonly accepted idea is to let the other side make the first offer or proposal. This so-called never open rule holds true if you do not know the market or are at a significant information disadvantage, perhaps like negotiating salary when you accept a job offer. If you're at an information disadvantage, you may benefit by letting your counterpart open the negotiations so that you learn more about their goals and perhaps what they're willing to offer. Otherwise, and assuming you've done your preparation work, be the first to offer your position. This allows you to frame the negotiation. For example, you might anchor expectations and establish the range of what's under consideration. You can put forward an ambitious or realistic position depending on the strategy and style you've chosen. If you're using a more competitive or challenging style, optimistic openings give you more room to alter your position, which in turn might encourage the other side to make concessions. If you've chosen a cooperative style and strategy, offer a more realistic opening position to nurture collaboration. Making concessions is the basic interaction that holds negotiations together. Concession making is also the most studied part of the negotiation process. During the bargaining stage, which comprises the back and forth of the negotiation, stay curious and rational, and don't take anything personally or let your emotions get the better of you. Ask open-ended questions and listen actively to demonstrate that you care about and respect the other party's position and to ensure that you understand it. Repeat what you believe to be their position back to them for clarification and summarize at various points. These actions can help you identify the common areas that may serve as negotiating focal points. Of all your attributes as a negotiator, influence is the most important. Your level of influence stems from your preparedness, reputation, behaviors, and position. Use your power and influence ethically. For example, make a point of offering fair proposals, which will increase your influence. Practice explaining your proposals well and logically. Avoid ultimatums unless absolutely necessary, and then only if you're prepared to follow through. The amount of power you possess while negotiating is only somewhat tied to your position and the authority it confers. You can also wield moral authority through the correctness of your arguments. The way you use your power or deal with your adversary's power is just as important as possessing it. You can never be too knowledgeable as a negotiator. Learn everything you can pertinent to the negotiation before the negotiation, and stay alert and curious so that you can learn more during the negotiations. Knowledge is power and influence. Be aware of your limitations so you know when you can't succeed on your own and need help. Always try to keep your ego from getting in the way. You lose influence when others sense that you are acting on ego. You can gain a good deal of influence through empathy and showing sensitivity to the issues and your counterpart's position and needs. When reason and compromise fail, sensitivity can save the day. Before we move on, please pause to think about negotiations you've been in, perhaps over a major purchase, or implementing a change initiative, or in your private life, buying a new car, a house, or even making vacation plans. What are some ways you've experienced other parties framing the negotiation and using their influence for advantage? Please pause this course and record your thoughts in your workbook. Resume the video when you're ready. People often overlook the importance of framing the negotiation properly. Frames color how you perceive the other party's actions and limit your options. Your frame determines how you characterize the other parties, especially the motives and meanings behind their actions, their interests, and how you would define a successful outcome. You may experience a clash of frames, perhaps if one party views the situation in terms of rights and the other views it in terms of power, or when one party focuses on the process and the other focuses on the outcomes. Framing something negatively is particularly easy if you react emotionally, so step back, be as calm as possible, and see if there is a better way to view the situation. Remember that the frame or psychological lens through which the parties view the negotiation has a significant effect on where they end up. For example, has the negotiation been framed as a collaborative problem-solving exercise, or as a competitive battle to be won? Has it been framed as short-term negotiation with the goal of reaching agreement quickly, or a longer-term series of meetings? Effective negotiators will seek to control or adjust the frame early in the process, ideally before the substance of the deal is even discussed. Where you can and where the situation warrants, try to frame the negotiation as cooperative and collaborative. Avoid the competitive frame by not issuing ultimatums, for example, and by resisting bluffs where you might make the other party think you have a better offer or stronger negotiating power. Instead, Be open. Present and explain alternatives for everyone to discuss. Be flexible and show generosity. At the closing stages of negotiation, be aware of overcommitting. This psychological factor comes into play when people invest a lot of time in an activity and develop an interest in seeing it completed. It can lead to unsatisfactory resolutions. Sometimes it's difficult to bring a negotiation to closing. To end it swiftly and efficiently, set deadlines. In highly competitive circumstances, be prepared to walk out too, but if you need to preserve the relationship or are in a cooperative and collaborative negotiation, consider getting to closing by offering to split the difference. This is quick, easy to understand, and shows reciprocity. Reaching an agreement is not the last step in any negotiation. The parties must implement the commitment. When individuals receive specific responsibilities, they are more likely to fulfill their end of the overall bargain. Depending on the negotiation, things like down payments, performance bonds, and deposits all demonstrate commitment. If you fail to perform, you forfeit something. Part of the commitment in Western culture for less legalistic agreements is a simple handshake, perhaps followed by a public announcement. Writing down a commitment, such as filling out an order form or questionnaire, builds awareness. In some deals, you would expect to sign a mutually binding contract. Whatever the deal, seek to establish some compelling next steps and accountability for honoring the agreement. Let's go through a hypothetical scenario where you can apply what you've just learned. You're negotiating with a colleague in your work group over access to a shared data analyst who works a 37.5-hour week. Your counterpart enters the negotiation with a demand. She needs the analyst at least 30 hours a week for her important project. Her body language suggests she is not willing to negotiate. You know that you need the analyst at least 15 hours per week for your project to succeed and have no budget to pay overtime or to outsource. What negotiation strategy and style would you choose and why? Please pause this course and record your thoughts in your workbook. Resume the video when you are ready. In this case, you're negotiating with a colleague, so preserving the relationship is likely very important. You would probably go in with a cooperative strategy and style, knowing what you need and what you're willing to concede, but your colleague's body language suggests she's in no mood to cooperate. When you are dealing with stubborn counterparts, try to move the negotiations ahead by reframing the situation. Don't reject her need. Instead, rephrase and reframe it. Once again, considering this scenario with your colleague, how could you frame this negotiation to your advantage and increase your likelihood of finding a win-win? Please pause this course and record your thoughts in your workbook. Resume the video when you're ready. This negotiation has quickly become tense. It could go off the rails very easily depending on your response. Again, don't abandon your collaborative style or strategy just yet. Instead, try to reframe the discussion as something you can problem solve together. Use your first response to show that you understand her position and sympathize with her need. Reframing means beginning to treat your opponents as partners in finding solutions and working together to forge a creative result that benefits everyone. Maybe you say something like, I sort of hoped we would end up splitting the analyst's time evenly, but I can see that you really need them more than that. My project is important too, though, and we really need a fair bit of data analysis. Do you have any thoughts on how we might find a solution? Asking her for her ideas might shift her away from counterproductive and competitive tactics toward collaboration. Maybe her team has a budget to augment the data analyst's time with outside help or to offer overtime. Maybe 30 hours was just an initial volley and she really needs only 25. Listen intently, watch to see if her body language changes, and paraphrase her responses so she knows you're listening, and so you learn more and understand her better. Consider making the first concession. Though you hoped for half the analyst's time, about 19 hours a week, suggest that you might be able to split their time a little more in your counterpart's favor. Then gauge her reaction. If she signals a more cooperative posture, make a suggestion such as, "What if we could get you 20 hours a week or even 22? Would that get you closer to what you need?" If you end up only a few hours apart, maybe you can agree to go to your director together and request a small amount of temporary overtime to make up the difference. No single style or strategy fits every negotiation. You might enter a negotiation with a planned strategy and style, but have to adjust it depending on your counterpart's behavior and style. Nevertheless, you should plan your opening style prior to the negotiation. You might rarely, if ever, choose to evade or avoid except when you can see no benefit or possible good outcome from the negotiation. Or you might avoid to stall the discussions until you're on a better footing. In these cases, ask a lot of questions. Use the time to learn as much as you can. Avoid making concessions, or if you do, think beforehand about what you're willing to give up. Likewise, you should rarely enter a negotiation with a conciliatory style and strategy because you will likely give away more than you and your stakeholders are comfortable with. But accommodation is sometimes necessary during a negotiation. For example, you might make a concession or two to buy time until your position improves or you've gathered more information. You might also use it temporarily to build trust and goodwill. Again, know what you're willing to offer and your limits. The more you understand your counterpart's goals, the more likely you are to find concessions that mean a great deal to them and are relatively minor from your perspective. Oftentimes, negotiations are combative. You may desire cooperation, but your counterpart isn't willing. Or you may hold a clear upper hand and need the outcome to go largely in your favor. If the relationship is less important, a competitive strategy and style is appropriate, provided you wield your advantage ethically. When you challenge, still remain curious. Listen, ask questions and respect your counterpart, no matter their position. If you find yourself competing from a disadvantaged position, try the avoidance style or accommodate as slowly and as little as you can while trying to steer the negotiation toward cooperation. Cooperation should be your default style. You won't use it every time, though. That depends on what you learn in preparation, the strength of your position, your goals, your counterpart style, and the importance of the relationship. Nevertheless, in most cases, good negotiators strive for the benefits gained from a collaborative, problem-solving negotiation. Make it work by being open and transparent. Offer reasonable proposals. Make reasonable concessions. Avoid responding emotionally. Take your counterpart's perspective and demonstrate empathy. As you will have already surmised, you'll often need to blend styles and borrow from 2 or 3 as negotiations unfold. Stay nimble and flexible so that you can switch styles depending on the situation. Thank you for watching this video lesson. We hope that you gleaned useful and helpful information. If you have any questions, please contact your local BD17 representative or contact HQ's BD17 at NAVFAC HQ Total Force Development at Navy.mil. Be sure to follow the instructions on this page to submit your self-certification for this course. Or, if you have a smartphone, you can use your camera to scan the QR code. This will generate the email for you. Just make sure you put your Navy email address in the body of the email if you are sending from a personal device. Thank you for participating today.